This queen lasted 6 months but changed a kingdom. In the turbulent world of Tudor England, 6 women walked into the orbit of one of history's most volatile monarchs. 2 would be executed. 1 would die in childbirth. 1 would be cast aside after decades. And only one would emerge with her honor, her wealth, and her life fully intact. Today we explore the extraordinary journey of Anne of Cleves, the 4th wife of King Henry VIII, remembered unfairly for a portrait, a disastrous first meeting, and a king's wounded ego. Yet her real story is far richer, more complex, and profoundly human. This is the tale of a woman who survived one of Europe's most dangerous courts, not through beauty, seduction, or ambition, but through adaptability, humility, emotional intelligence, and political instinct. This is the story of the queen who won by letting go of the crown. You won't believe why. Anne was born on 22nd September 1515 in Dusseldorf into the powerful but understated Duchy of Cleves. Her father, John III, ruled lands straddling the Rhine, positioned between the rival giants of Europe, the Habsburg Empire, the Kingdom of France, and the ever-fracturing Holy Roman Empire. This was not a lavish or flamboyant Renaissance court like Ferrara, Florence, or even Tudor England. Cleves was conservative, orderly, and deeply concerned with diplomatic neutrality. Anne grew up alongside her siblings, Sibylla, who would later marry the Elector of Saxony Wilhelm, known as William the Rich, who would become Duke after their father Amalia, another potential bride considered by Henry VIII. Anne's mother, Maria of Jülichberg, was strong-minded, politically astute, and keenly aware of Europe's shifting religious landscape. She raised her children with practicality, discipline, and preparation for diplomatic marriage, not courtly theatrics. Education in Cleves did not include musical training, dancing, literary arts, courtly flirtation, theological debate, all of which were considered essential at the glittering Tudor court. Instead, Anne was trained in household management, textile production etiquette, suitable for a traditional German noblewoman, and a modest Christian worldview, influenced by the Erasmian reform movement, which supported moderate religious reform without radical Protestantism. This matters, for when Anne entered England, her upbringing collided dramatically with Henry's Renaissance expectations. This is Shadows of History series. Allow me to be your history guide. The late 1530s were among the most dangerous years of Henry VIII's reign. After breaking with Rome, England became an isolated island surrounded by Catholic superpowers. The Pope had encouraged Catholic rulers, including Francis I of France and Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, to unite against England. Henry feared invasion. He feared betrayal from within. He feared that the fragile foundation of his new Church of England could collapse. He needed allies. Specifically, he needed a Protestant ally strong enough to deter European Catholic aggression. Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister and architect of the English Reformation, pushed for an alliance with the Protestant-leaning Duchy of Cleves. Anne's brother, Duke Wilhelm, had aligned himself with Lutheran princes in the Schmalkaldic League. Cromwell saw the marriage as the cornerstone of England's future. Henry saw something else: the portrait. In August 1539, Henry sent his finest artist, Hans Holbein the Younger, to paint Anne and her sister Amalia. Holbein was instructed to portray Anne realistically, but also attractively, not exaggerated, yet tasteful. The difference between flattery and idealization in Tudor portraiture remains a subject of debate even among modern historians. What we do know is this: Holbein returned with a portrait showing a serene, composed young woman with smooth features, pale skin, and calm eyes. The image emphasized dignity and elegance, not sensuality. Henry, who was growing older, heavier, and more insecure, fell in love with the idea of Anne, her peaceful expression, her modesty, her apparent gentleness. He approved the match. The treaty was signed. For Cromwell, it was the greatest diplomatic triumph of his career. For Anne, it was the beginning of one of history's most complicated marriages. Anne of Cleves arrived at Deal, Kent, on 27 December 1539, after a rough winter crossing. She was eagerly awaited by Henry, who, in a bizarre flash of romantic idealism, insisted on meeting her in disguise. This was a medieval, chivalric ritual Henry adored. The king approaches the bride disguised as a servant. The bride, recognizing his royal aura, falls into his arms. But Anne had never read English romances. She had no training in such theatrics. Her culture did not include elaborate courtly love traditions. So on 1st January 1540, when Henry burst into her chambers at Rochester dressed as a low-ranking messenger, Anne reacted as any bewildered noblewoman might. She barely acknowledged him. She continued watching the bull-baiting festival, arranged for her entertainment. She did not swoon, gasp, or fall to her knees. Henry interpreted this not as cultural misunderstanding, but as personal rejection. It was the moment, many historians believe, that doomed the marriage. From that hour forward, Henry viewed Anne with cold disappointment, even resentment. Anne never understood what she had done wrong. Despite Henry's misgivings, the political contract could not be undone without catastrophic diplomatic consequences. And so, on January 6, 1540, at Greenwich Palace, Henry VIII married Anne of Cleves. Witnesses described Henry as sullen, distracted, and stiff. Anne, unaware of the king's growing disgust, acted with courtesy, grace, and quiet obedience. But the true crisis came that night: Henry's account of the wedding night. The morning after, Henry whispered to Cromwell, "I liked her before not well, but now I like her much worse." He complained that Anne's body was unattractive, that she smelled unpleasant, that her breasts were sagging, that she lacked virginity. But these claims are contradicted by multiple accounts of Anne's beauty from foreign ambassadors, the lack of any evidence that Anne was not a virgin, and the assessment of the women who attended her, who found nothing unusual. Most historians believe the real issues were Henry's declining health and impotence, his crushed ego from the failed chivalric gesture, his realization that he no longer needed this alliance, his lack of attraction to Anne's reserved personality, the political pressures that made him resent Cromwell. Whatever the cause, Henry insisted, the marriage had not been consummated. This would soon become the key argument for annulment. By spring of 1540, Henry was desperate for escape. But divorcing a foreign princess was no small matter. It could trigger war. It could provoke the Schmalkaldic League. It could ruin England's Protestant alliances. Yet Anne made the decision that changed her life. When summoned to discuss the king's grievances, she did not protest. She did not plead. She did not accuse. She did not demand. Instead, she displayed humility, obedience, and calm logic. She acknowledged the pre-contract rumor with Francis of Lorraine, an agreement made in her childhood, never consummated and legally irrelevant, but this gave Henry the loophole he needed. On 9th of July 1540, the marriage was annulled. Anne accepted the verdict gracefully. Henry, astonished by her docility and relieved beyond measure, rewarded her with Richmond Palace, Hever Castle, extensive lands in Kent and Surrey, a generous, lifelong pension, the honorary title of the king's beloved sister. Precedence over all women except the king's daughters and future wife Anne was no longer queen, but she was now one of the wealthiest, safest women in England. If Anne escaped the marriage unscathed, Thomas Cromwell did not. Henry blamed him for the arrangement. His enemies seized the moment. On 28 July 1540, Cromwell was executed at the Tower of London. On that same day, Henry married Catherine Howard. The contrast is brutal. Anne gained freedom. Cromwell lost his life. Anne indirectly had brought down the most powerful minister in England, but she bore no responsibility, and Henry never resented her for it. Anne adapted to her new status with remarkable grace. She learned English. She adopted English fashions. She threw herself into the rhythms of the Tudor countryside, hunting, gaming, hosting large household gatherings. Henry visited her often. They exchanged gifts, they bantered, they ate together, they maintained an affectionate, almost sibling-like relationship. Throughout the reign of Catherine Howard, Anne remained neutral and invisible, a wise choice as Catherine's downfall approached. She did not court attention. She did not seek the crown again. She never made trouble. Henry appreciated her discretion. Rumors and speculations. Some ambassadors speculated Henry might remarry Anne after Catherine Howard's execution in 1542. Anne herself is said to have privately expressed interest, but Henry had lost interest in marriage entirely. Still, Anne remained a respected presence. When Henry died, young Edward VI inherited the throne. Anne's pension continued. Her lands remained secure, but she had little involvement in political life. She occasionally visited Elizabeth at Hatfield. She participated in events such as Christmas festivities, where she played cards and wore lavish gowns. But under the fiercely Protestant government of Edward, Anne's influence faded. Mary wound in 1553-1558. Anne regained visibility when Mary ascended. Anne, although raised in a reformist-leaning duchy, had remained personally traditional and probably leaned Catholic, which endeared her to Mary. Anne rode beside Mary in the triumphal procession through London, a symbolic moment showing unity among the Tudor women. But Mary's more intense Catholic policies made Anne uncomfortable. She withdrew from court life and settled into a quiet existence at Chelsea Old Manor. By the 1550s, Anne had settled into peaceful domesticity. She tended her gardens, She managed her estates. She socialized modestly. She watched England change, from Henry's Reformation to Edward's Protestantism to Mary's Catholic revival. Anne's health declined during a harsh influenza season. On 16th of July 1557, she died aged 41. She left behind a modest will, gifts to her stepchildren, payments to her loyal servants, and a legacy of peace after a life of political danger. She was buried, uniquely among Henry's wives, in Westminster Abbey. History often reduces Anne to a shallow caricature. The ugly wife, the king's mistake, the flattered portrait, the one Henry didn't like. But this is not the real Anne. The real Anne was diplomatic, intelligent, adaptable, emotionally perceptive, culturally flexible, pragmatic, kind. She survived, thrived in the Tudor court without flattery, manipulation, or ambition. She showed that survival for a woman in Henry's England was not rooted in seduction or power, but in emotional intelligence and strategic humility. Her life is a powerful reminder. Sometimes the greatest victory is knowing when not to fight. She became a respected figure at court. She rewrote the idea of a failed queen. Thank you for joining us for this in-depth exploration of Anne of Cleves, one of the most misunderstood women of Tudor history, and one of the few who navigated Henry VIII's world with grace, dignity, and wisdom. If you enjoyed this documentary, please consider subscribing for more long-form explorations of world history, royal intrigue, and the human stories behind the headlines of the past. The journey of Anne of Cleves offers a deeply human lesson about resilience, emotional intelligence, and the quiet art of self-preservation in the face of overwhelming power. Sent to England as part of a political bargain she did not create, Anne arrived hopeful yet unprepared for the ruthless expectations of Henry VIII's court, where a woman's worth was measured by beauty, charm, and instant obedience. When the king rejected her and the marriage unravelled, Anne stood at a crossroads where many before her had met tragedy. But instead of resisting, she chose understanding over ego and wisdom over emotion. By accepting the annulment with dignity, she transformed potential disgrace into long-term security, gaining independence, respect, and a rare freedom denied to most royal women of her time. Anne's story is not one of romance, but of awareness. She read the room, understood power, and adjusted without losing her sense of self. In doing so, she outlived the chaos that destroyed others and carved out a peaceful life on her own terms. Her journey teaches us that intelligence is not always loud, strength is not always confrontational, and sometimes the most powerful decision a person can make is to adapt, endure, and quietly choose survival over pride, an insight that remains deeply relatable even centuries later. In the next episode, we travel into the tragic life of Catherine of Aragon, the young queen whose rise and fall shook England. Until then, remember that history is not merely kings and battles, but the stories of people, their hopes, fears, triumphs, and the choices that shape their lives.